I think we're about ready to make a start. Caroline.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We are delighted to be bringing you this webinar on making groundwater visible. For those of you who have been attending our weekly session, it's great to see you again. And for those who are joining us for the first time, welcome. If you missed our previous webinars and want to catch up, they are now available on demand from the Bureau's YouTube channel. My name is Caroline Andrzejewski, and I'm pleased to be your moderator today. Angela is our producer and will help moderate your questions. Hi, Ange, how are you?
Hey, Caroline, doing well, thank you.
Pretty good, thanks. That's the way. We have a high volume of attendees today, so we will address as many questions as we can. But before we start, may I have your attention, please, while we cover off on some housekeeping items. Our session today will run for 60 minutes with plenty of time allocated for questions. So please don't be shy. Send us your questions and share your insights with us via the chat function throughout the webinar. If we have any unanswered questions at the end, we may stay on the line to answer them, or please follow up with us after the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and the video will be shared with you via email. For first-time webinar attendees, please see some helpful tips on your screen. Please note the chat box where you can send through any questions or feedback for the presenter. Please send us your questions during the session and we will answer as many as possible during the allocated breaks. The conversation isn't just confined to the webinar. We welcome interaction on social media too. Don't forget to include #BOMWebinars in your posts. Finally, today's presenters. Joining us today in the webinar studio is John Sharples and Eloise Nation. Welcome to you both and thanks for being here. Hi John, hi Eloise, how are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you.
Hi Caroline, thanks for having us.
Thanks for being here. Part of the session will be delivered by John. John is primarily responsible for groundwater data management, helping fulfil the Bureau's obligations under the Water Act 2007 to collect water data and make it publicly available. By engaging with lead water agencies, this work has led to the creation of a national groundwater database, holding water level information for more than 227,000 bores and salinity information for more than 240,000 bores. A lot of bores, John. And other parts of the presentation will be presented by Eloise. Eloise was involved in developing the National Groundwater Information System, or NGIS. We like acronyms at the BOM, a spatial database of nationally consistent groundwater data, including 870,000 bores and associated bore logs. Working closely with state and territory agencies, the Bureau brings together groundwater data from each agency into a central, accessible NGIS database. John and Eloise, before we make a start, can you tell us some of the greatest challenges with measuring groundwater and what inspired you to get into this line of work?
Okay, well I guess what inspired me, it goes way back now. It was when I was at university. I was studying geology and I did a subject in hydrogeology and I absolutely loved it. So from there I went on to do more subjects and on to do my honours in hydrogeology. And now I've been working in the field for maybe 15 years, so quite a while. In terms of challenges,
what are the challenges?
In terms of challenges, back when I was at uni, it was really hard to get access to groundwater data, especially to get a picture of groundwater all across Australia. And so we're very fortunate at the BOM that we've been able to do the work to bring all of that groundwater data together and make it accessible to the public. And that's what John and I will be talking about today.
Oh, great. So you basically answered your challenge in your work.
Yeah.
Solved the problem. John?
Well, very similar to Eloise. It started for me when I was at university. I was going back to uni to study environmental science and sort of by accident, I ended up doing groundwater because my supervisor at the time was a big groundwater guy, and hello, John Webb, if you're out there. And he got me started doing some groundwater projects, and from there, I just blossomed into a career.
And great career it sounds like it's been. So just before we kick off, we think we have a poll just to find out a bit more about our audience. So Anne, tell us about the poll.
Most definitely. So our good friend over in the US, Mike, has launched that poll, and many of you will be seeing a pop-up box on your screen which will give you a few answer choices there as well as the question. So for anyone who can't see that, I'll just read that out quickly. We just want to know a little bit more about you and the sector in which you work. So our answer choices there, we've got A for government, B for consulting or private industry, water management, agriculture, or perhaps something entirely different. And look, if that is the case, please type into the chat where you're or what industry you're representing today. It'd be great to hear from you. I can see that about half of you have responded, so it would be great to get a few more responses in, but we'll see how we go with that one. John, Eloise, what are we expecting to see here, guys? What are you, I won't say what are we hoping for, because we're hoping everyone's here, but what do you think will be the most popular?
We actually have a groundwater mailbox, groundwater@vom.gov.au, and we get a lot of emails from our users, and we record information about them, what sector they work for, and the majority, I'd say, actually come from private consulting, and after that it's research, so people at universities and at CSIRO, and then followed by people working for government at all levels. So I'm expecting to see consulting as the top.
Oh, okay. Well, that's very exciting to know. Well, our friend Mike will shut down the poll and share those results with us in just a moment, so we'll see what comes back. And we have had a couple of people message us in the chat as well. Private industry, utilities. What else have we got here?
I think I saw a Crown Research Institute in New Zealand.
Yeah, we did. We love our Kiwi friends. Thanks for joining us, guys. A landowner, not producing, interested in water management. Thank you very much, Mark. A few more from research, actually. Krista and Frederica are both from research and consultancy.
Yeah, I should have mentioned we actually do get quite a few emails from farmers and landholders as well.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic.
Angela, your results are showing.
Yeah, we've got them here. We can see them.
You can see them all right. What are our results?
All right.
Let's go through them quickly.
So number one, the biggest group at 46% was government. Then number two is consulting at 21%, and then we've got 10% water management, 8% for agriculture, and 7% for other, as we've already read through in the chat.
Awesome. All right.
Is that kind of what you guys were expecting? You said you have a lot of government, but maybe not as many private industries.
No, it's today. So welcome to everyone joining us from government. It's a good opportunity for us to let you know about our products.
Yeah, it is good to see. It's good to see maybe a slightly different audience than we often get through our mailbox and through some of our other channels.
Yeah. Awesome. So we're probably ready to make a start then. Yeah. Thanks everyone for your engaging with us. John, do you want to kick us off?
No worries. Well, welcome everyone, and across Australia and internationally as well. It's great to see you all here in webinar land. So I'll quickly just go over what we're going to cover today. First, we're going to talk a bit about the importance of groundwater in Australia, and then I'm going to touch on the Bureau's role in groundwater. So why is the Bureau involved? And then we're going to spend the bulk of the webinar talking about the Bureau's Groundwater Information Suite. And this is a set of 4 products which we'll go through in a bit of detail, which are really the core of our groundwater offering. So I'll start with just a few little facts about groundwater. So across Australia, 1/5 to 1/3 of all the water used comes from groundwater. So straight away we can see that it is a very important resource for the country, and it's vital in certain areas where certainly there's no surface water. So the range in that number is partly to do with estimating this number, but also partly to do with how that use changes year on year. And one of the things we do see about changes in groundwater use is when we have wet years and there's surface water available, we tend to use less groundwater because people use surface water preferentially, and we have dry years, people do tend to rely on the groundwater. It's a bit of variability, but still a very important resource. Economically, a report from 2013 by Deloitte stated that groundwater use contributes around $6.8 billion to GDP. So it's not just that we use a lot of water, it's that it supports some very vital industries, and that includes agriculture, mining, quite a big contribution to urban supply, as well as other important industries. Now, just looking a little bit closer, why I quoted that value of a fifth to a third. In some areas, it's actually a lot more than that. So here, just looking at data from the Bureau's National Water Account. On the left-hand side, we have a graph of water sourced for Daly region in Northern Territory, and there 81% of the water sourced in the 2016-2017 financial year was from groundwater, so absolutely vital resource for them. Similarly, in Perth, in Western Australia, some 68% of the water source was from groundwater, and they have a large reliance there on groundwater for their urban water supply. But it's not just people that use groundwater. Groundwater is also vital for supporting many ecosystems across the country, including wetlands, springs, providing base flows to rivers, as well as terrestrial vegetation that can access groundwater via the shallow water table. And these sites are often very significant culturally, so groundwater is supporting not just the environment, but the cultural significance of those environmental features as well. Now, you might be thinking, why the Bureau of Meteorology? Why do they have a role under the ground, so to speak? And this story starts back in sort of the late 1990s, around 1997, where the southeast of Australia entered one of the longest, most protracted droughts in Australia's history. There was over 10 years of continuous year-on-year below average rainfall. This put a huge amount of stress onto water systems in the area, in particular the Murray-Darling Basin, which is a very important water resource for Australia. It put a lot of stress onto urban systems and water supply for cities, with dams seeing some all-time low levels. And in general, there was a lot of concern around water and water management, especially in the basin and the southeast of Australia. And in response to that, the Australian government enacted the Water Act. So the Water Act created new roles for the federal government, including the Bureau, and the roles given to the Bureau were to collect, hold and publish the nation's water data, including groundwater. In terms of groundwater, the data that we have to collect under these regulations, bore and borehole data, levels of pressure, salinity and pH, as well as data on where licensed entitlements are held and how much groundwater is used. Now, to add context to that data we're required to collect, we also collect data on groundwater-dependent ecosystems, groundwater management, aquifer boundaries, including in 3D, which Eloise and myself will talk about a bit later on, and hydrogeochemistry. So this is really the core work of the Bureau, and I have to acknowledge here that a lot of the successes we've had at this have been through collaboration, so working with the state and territory agencies and our Commonwealth partners as well. So a lot of thanks goes out to a lot of people for the work you're about to see today. And all that data is published via our website in the Groundwater Information Suite. So there's 4 products which you can see here, and you can find them on our groundwater landing page on the Bureau's website, and the URL is there at the bottom of the screen. I think it's back to you guys for the next poll.
Another poll, because we love a bit of trivia. And I think actually Caroline might have given away the answer to this one to anyone who was listening intently as she delivered those housekeeping slides. So what we'd like to know now, and once again you should get a pop-up box on your screen with a question and some answer choices, is how many groundwater bores have been drilled in Australia? So A, either around 800, B, around 8,000, C, around 80,000, or perhaps D, more than 800,000. And I wonder if anyone listened to your housekeeping site. This is actually a
introduction. It's reading comprehension or listening comprehension.
Yeah, so we've got, we can see that quite a number of you have already submitted your responses, so thank you for doing so. And in just a moment, our friend Mike will close off that poll and share those results with you. I mean, Oh, you can see them? Yep, okay.
I haven't quite got the results yet, but
Oh,
I think they're coming up soon.
They're coming up soon. Okay, great. Well, we can probably tell people it's definitely not A, so I hope no one answered A.
I've got the results through now.
You've got them?
Yeah.
All right, tell us. I'm
Well,
dying to know.
You're right, Ange. Nobody answered A. That was 0%. And we had 2% saying around 8,000, 23% saying around 80,000, but the vast majority, 66%, said more than 800,000.
And what is the result? Here we go.
Tell us.
More than 800,000, D.
Yeah.
And you can actually see a map there on the screen showing the distribution of those bores all across Australia. And we'll actually show you where you can get data for these bores a bit later in the webinar.
Absolutely. So anyone who got that correct, guys, bragging rights are all yours. All right. So what's next then?
Okay, now I think it's over to me, and I'm going to talk about some of the products in the Groundwater Information Suite. So John just introduced us to the suite, 4 national groundwater products that are freely available from the Bureau's website. Now I'm going to go through 3 of these. So I'll start with the NGIS database. That is a spatial groundwater database. Then I'll talk about the Australian Groundwater Explorer. That makes the NGIS data available online without the need for specialist software. It also gives you access to other data sets like water level and salinity, as well as to 3D PDFs. And we've actually got something quite special for you here today. We're going to give you a sneak peek at our new and improved 3D hydrostratigraphic PDFs. And John's going to give you a live demo of that later on. So if we go back to the Groundwater Information Suite homepage, I'm going to start by talking about the NGIS database and about the Australian Groundwater Explorer. And so both of these products give you access to those more than 800,000 bores that we were talking about just before. So the NGIS database will give you offline access, whereas the Explorer gives you access to this data online. So I'm going to start by talking about the NGIS database. I'll talk about how it's made, what it contains, and what it's used for, because this really explains the utility and the importance of this product. So in Australia, groundwater data is traditionally held and managed by state and territory agencies. This means that the data is held in various databases all around the country in different formats, using different types of software, using different types of terminology. So that it means that if you wanted to do a study in, say, an interjurisdictional area or a national study, it means you'd have to collect data from many different sources. So under the water regulations, we have required state and territory agencies to standardise their data and deliver it to the Bureau. Once it's at the Bureau, we also standardise the terminology used to describe aquifers using the National Aquifer Framework. We then integrate all of this data into a national database, and this is where you have those 870,000 bores. So the type of data we have in the NGIS is those bores, as well as bore logs. So we have lithology logs, construction logs, and hydrostratigraphy logs. We also have 2.5D and 3D aquifer surfaces, and this is what John's going to demo for you later on. Now, all of this data is absolutely essential to provide the metadata needed to locate and interpret time series data, like water levels and salinity. So we use this data ourselves and publish it through the Groundwater Explorer. We also use it in the Groundwater Insight. We sort of value add and do some analyses and publish it in the Insight. We also use it as an input to the Bureau's water resource assessments, like Water in Australia. So those are some of the products, but the NGIS is also a product in its own right. And so you can access this national database by sending an email to our groundwater mailbox That's groundwater.bom.gov.au. You can also download cut-down versions of this database through the Groundwater Explorer. So you can get the data for states and territories and for river regions. And I'll demo that later on. So our next product is the Australian Groundwater Explorer. And this is actually our most popular product. So it gives you online access to groundwater data. And that includes the bore data from NGIS and bore log data, as well as water levels and salinity, rainfall trends, and some contextual data sets. Things like land use, groundwater management areas, and geology. So the Groundwater Explorer allows you to view and search for this data online, as well as to download it for further analysis. So at this stage you might be thinking, what's so special about this product? Because there are many groundwater data portals across Australia, one for each state and territory. But I guess the advantage of the Explorer is that it has data for the whole country, which makes it ideal if you're studying an interjurisdictional area, or if you've got projects all over the country, or if you're even doing a national study. So with that in mind, I'm going to take you through a demo focusing on the Murray Basin. That's an interjurisdictional basin that's at the intersection of Victoria, South Australia, and New South Wales. And for this case study, I think I'll focus on, a typical case study for a hydrogeologist, which is starting a project in a new area. And the things you have to think about are, one, getting an understanding of the hydrogeology and the groundwater processes in the area. And then two, getting access to the groundwater data you need to do your study, whether it's modelling or some sort of assessment. So I'll launch straight into the demo. So if we zoom into that part of the country, the Murray Basin, and now we're looking at bores shown in grey, and you can see the distribution of bores with them concentrated along the rivers, then bores to the west, but there are patches without many bores at all. And so I guess you'd be wondering, what's controlling the distribution of bores in this area. So what we can do is to turn on the bores by purpose layer, and the colour of the bores denotes their purpose. So along the river, you can see there are lots of blue bores. They're the monitoring bores. Whereas to the west, you can see green and orange bores. So the green are irrigation bores, whereas the orange are stock and domestic bores. So again, you may still be wondering, what's controlling the distribution of those bores. And if we add the land use layer, you can see the areas in purple. So they're conservation areas and so national parks. And you can see that in those areas, you're not getting many bores at all. Whereas in the agricultural areas, the green land use areas and the brown land use areas, that's the irrigated agriculture and the dry land agriculture, you get those stock and domestic and irrigation bores. And you get all of those monitoring bores along the Murray River, monitoring salinity. So another thing you might like to do as a hydrogeologist is start to look at the availability of water level data. So that's an important input to any sort of groundwater study. So we've got a layer that shows the location of bores that have water level data, and the colour of the points shows you how many recordings they have. So the light blue has less than 5 measurements, whereas the dark blue has more than 200 measurements. So if we use the bore viewer tool, we can choose a bore in Victoria and start to look at its hydrograph. So you can see the seasonal trends in the groundwater level, presumably as a result of pumping. But on the graph as well, there's a light grey line, which is actually the rainfall trend. So you can start to see the relationships between the rainfall and the groundwater levels. And you also have some historical percentiles on there, showing you the average, above average and below average statistics for that site. So you can place a measurement at any point in time in its historical context. Because this is a national product, we can actually look at a bore that's in the same aquifer, but across the border in South Australia. It has some similar trends, but this graph actually goes further back in time. So you can start to see what the levels were like, you know, in the early 90s. So that was the water level data. We also have salinity data, and we've got a similar layer which shows you the availability of salinity data. So again, the light pink shows you bores that only have one salinity measurement, whereas the dark pink shows bores with more than 10 measurements. So if we select some bores, and we can see down the bottom, we get a summary of information about those bores that we've just selected, and we can choose a bore that has quite a few measurements. So we'll open it up and have a look at the graph, and you can see this bore has a salinity of around 2,000 to 3,000 microsiemens per centimetre. So it's quite a brackish bore, not suitable for the potable water use. Another data set that you'd be interested in as a hydrogeologist is looking at the bore logs. And so we've got another layer that shows the location of bore logs. So if we select one of those sites, we can bring up the bore log charts for that bore. And you can see we've got lithology logs, construction logs, and hydrostratigraphy logs. So the lithology logs provide information about the sediments and the rock types. Construction shows you the location of the screen. So that's very important because that will tell you where this bore is accessing water. And the next one is the hydrostratigraphy log. And so that's going to tell you about the various formations that are intersected by that bore. So if we look at the construction log and look at the screen, we can see that this bore is intersecting the Murray Group limestone. Okay, so once you've had a good look at the data online, you probably want to download it for further analysis. And through the Explorer, we have pre-packaged data downloads that are available for river regions and for states. So you can select one of these regions and then download the data. So that's the NGIS data plus the water levels and salinity. And you can use that for offline analysis.
Great, Eloise. Thanks. That's so interesting. So we've got our first Q&A session. We've actually had a few questions coming through, but I was just waiting till now. A couple were sort of back during, I guess it's the NGIS, it's a data question.
Yes.
So it's to do with whether the state level data and the national level data is, whether it's synced yet, I think is sort of, I'm just paraphrasing a bit.
Yeah,
so specifically when a new bore is logged at the state level, how soon is that updated in the Bureau's resources?
So we only get the data from the state once a year.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're not completely in sync. But yeah, I mean, in the future it would be lovely if that was the case.
Yeah.
But the other data, like the water levels and salinity, we get updates much more frequently. So we get them on a monthly basis.
Thank you. Awesome. And thank you to Paul for asking that question as well and for engaging with us.
I was just going to add some context that currently we publish those salinity levels 6 monthly, but we're hoping to move that to a monthly publishing cycle hopefully this year. I don't want to promise anything we can't deliver, but that's the plan.
Cool. Watch this space.
So there's another question from Zane about, it's another sort of between data, but it's the aquifer framework. And they're asking how consistent are they between states and national? So I guess it's that same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a couple of years ago now, we developed the National Aquifer Framework, and it's designed to standardise what the states, the terminology the states use. And so we developed that in conjunction with the states. So they are a little bit different, but they're designed so that there's a mapping between the two. So, and the National Aquifer Framework is available on the Bureau website.
Okay.
So, yeah, you can have a look
So you
at
can see how the two
the
compare and
terminology
match them
for
across.
any state and compare that to the National Aquifer Framework.
Cool. We might just give people another minute to ask questions.
Absolutely, guys. Make the most of the fact that we've got two experts in their fields here giving us their time today. So if there is anything, please don't hesitate to ask them. And Paul was just following on from his previous question.
Follow-on question from Paul is, what's the timing of water level updates on bore sites? So
Sure. So perhaps just we'll explain how we work with that data. So we don't own any bores, and we don't. The Bureau doesn't measure that data themselves. Our role is to really collect data that is measured and held by usually state water agencies, ag departments. So once they have measured and collected that data and it goes into their system, periodically they send an update to the Bureau. So there is always a bit of a delay, and often you'll find that if you want really the best cutting, data from yesterday, sometimes you'll have to go to the state agencies, but if you're happy with something that might be maybe a month old, a couple months old, the Bureau should have it all.
okay, cool. I just had a quick question. Can I ask a question?
Oh, you may,
Okay.
Caroline.
On the just on the salinity, I think you had a salinity graph up, and it looked like the salinity was increasing in that bore particularly. Is that common? Is that happening in lots of bores, or is that?
Well, that's a difficult one.
Sorry.
But I think the
You can
story
take it offline if you want.
the story is quite different in different parts of the country. I don't know, John, if you've got more insight into that one.
Typically, salinity doesn't change that much across the country.
Okay.
And later on, when we look at the groundwater insight, we can show you a bit of information about that. That's not to say that it never does, because there are certainly areas and situations where you do have big changes to salinity. But it's not something that varies as much as levels, which can go up and down quite a lot.
Okay.
Having said that, there are some back in the 80s and 90s, we were very concerned about groundwater becoming more saline. Shallow groundwater was coming close to the surface, evaporating and concentrating salt. So it is certainly a big issue across the country, but not something that happens widespread. It's not actors don't suddenly go salty and fresh and salty and fresh and salty and fresh.
All right. Cool.
Fair enough. And another one there from Bruce. What percentage of bores have full data sets?
Yeah, so if you certainly if you want a bore that's got all of the bore information and the logs and water levels and salinity, it'd be around Carolyn had the numbers at the start there, it'd be around 200,000 probably.
Yeah.
But then it's sort of a cascading step down. I don't know how many bores have logs, Eloise, do you know?
I'm not entirely sure. And the other thing is it does vary quite a bit across the country. Some states have a lot of bore logs interpreted information. South Australia, for example, has a lot, and then other states and regions don't have quite as much. So.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers at my fingertips, but it'd be maybe half would have some kind of log.
They would have, a lot of them have lithology logs and construction logs. It's just really that high value interpreted hydrostratigraphy log that's missing from many of them.
Yep. So there's certainly it's sort of in the NGIS that runs the whole gambit from some that are a location and maybe a depth and not much more, through to maybe I would say a third to a quarter that would be a really full, rich data set.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you, Bruce. That was a good question. And if you do want to discuss that with us further, feel free to shoot us an email. We will show that email address once again towards the end of the presentation. So you're most welcome to drop us a line anytime.
Now, I think we have one more quick question before we move on to the next bit of our presentation. Is there scope in Groundwater Explorer for a key sites drop-down selector with long-term records as implemented for weather records?
Great
question.
It is a great question, and it's funny that you asked this because we're actually working on a project to do just this. So we're looking at a project that would sort of scope out some reference stations, so sites that have really good data quality, but also that we have a good understanding of the what controls the water levels at those sites. So whether they're controlled by groundwater recharge or surface water interaction or irrigation, that sort of thing. So that project at the moment is just in the initial scoping phase, but hopefully you'll hear more about it in the next year or two. So, and I mean, we're always want to hear from people about how they would use that sort of product, and it really helps us to build up a use case for future products. So I would really encourage Dan to send an email to groundwater@bom.gov.au, telling us a bit more about his need for that product.
Thanks. Well, we might move on, and there's a couple more questions, but we might try and get some at our next Q&A time, and if not, we'll follow up. We're just mindful of time. We don't want to run out of time for everything. So, John, sneak peek.
Sneak peek, that's
right.
So the next thing we're going to talk about is something that's actually available through the Groundwater Explorer, and this is the 3D PDFs. So this is something that we currently have, a 3D PDF offering, and we're just in the process of updating them, adding new functionality and improving their visualization. So I'm going to do a bit of a live demo here. Just flick over.
Yeah, so maybe while you're doing that, I could mention that so these PDFs, all you need is Adobe Reader to use them. You don't need any specialist software, and most people have Adobe Reader already installed on their computer, and if they don't, they can easily download it.
Yeah. So we really like these because they're a great way to expose 3D information that typically you classically need specialised software to look at that to allow basically anyone to have access to that data. So what we're looking at here is the new updated PDF for the St Vincent Basin in South Australia, and if you look at the map in the bottom right-hand corner here, you can see the outline around Adelaide. And right at the top, I'll just mention that this was developed in collaboration with the South Australian Government Department of Environment, Water and Natural Resources, or I think they're just Environment and Water now. So we have to have a huge thanks to them for providing the data, but also providing a lot of the technical know-how. So just straight up, I'll show you that these are all interactive things that you can grab and turn them around and spin them around to look at different areas. We have here presented information that we think is relevant to groundwater. So in the top right-hand corner, there's some contextual information. I can turn these on and off. There's groundwater management areas, land use, roads, surface geology. And here you can see I've left on the towns and the green dots there showing you where there's bores in the area. So if we spin this around again to get a bit of a side-on view, we can then see the hydrostratigraphic units there. So these have been coloured by whether they're an aquifer or an aquitard. So the aquifers are in blue and the aquitards in brown. If you want to get a bit more of a look at how they interact, I can just go over here to the right-hand side and click them on and off. And now we can see those bore lines poking down through the aquifers. So we think this is a really great way to give people a sort of a conceptual look at the area. You can see where bores are drilled, what aquifers they're intersecting with. And if you want to convey sort of hydrogeological information that might be a bit hard to explain, you can get one of those PDFs out and say, hey, look over here on the right-hand side, there's a big fault, and we can actually see that the aquifer there is completely sectioned off, so you're going to have different hydrogeological responses there. There's a bunch of tools, so we can look at pre-canned views. I'll just spin this around to look at the east, and we can turn all our layers back on. And one feature that we've added, which is really nice, is cutting cross-sections. I'll just zoom in a bit, and I'll turn on our cross-section tool, and we can actually get a cross-section cut through that PDF, and you can step that backwards and forwards, just to have a look at different cross-sections through through those layers there, and you can spin that around again. You can contextual layers on top. So we really like this tool because it's a great way to sort of, when you're talking about an area and trying to describe the hydrogeology, you can pull these out and give everyone a really quick look at how bores work, how they intersect different units and how those units overlay each other. There's also a few other features like vertical exaggeration, and you can find out a lot more about these on our website. So Eloise, what's the timeline for these being released?
Yeah, so we're currently working on them, and we're looking at releasing them to the Explorer in late July, early August. And as it is something we're currently working on, we welcome your feedback on what you've seen today. So just an email to groundwater@bond.gov.au. And John did mention that we're adding some PDFs for new regions. And so those regions will be St Vincent Basin and the Great Artesian Basin. But we've already got some 3D PDFs on the website for 9 regions already, and we'll be updating those to the new template as well.
Cool. Thanks very much.
And what is the cost of this PDF?
Well, free.
100%
Wow. I think that's music to all our ears. Very exciting stuff.
Yep. Okay, so back to me, and I'm going to talk about the third product in the Groundwater Information Suite. This is the GDE Atlas. So again, you can see it here on the Bureau's Groundwater Information page. So the Groundwater Dependent Ecosystems Atlas, or GDE Atlas, provides mapping of ecosystems supported by groundwater. And it provides information for all of Australia. It's really the only place in Australia that you can get this sort of information for, which is very important for when it comes to doing things like water planning and also environmental impact assessments, because you really want to consider these environmental aspects in that type of work. So the Atlas has 3 types of GDEs: aquatic GDEs, like rivers, wetlands and springs, terrestrial GDEs, like vegetation, and also subterranean GDEs, like caves and aquifers. Although I should note that for the subterranean GDEs, we only have caves at the moment, and just for Queensland and Tasmania. So if we just go back to the area I was looking at before, the Murray Basin, we can see some of the GDEs here. So these are the aquatic GDEs, and you'll notice they're coloured in blues and purples. And that colour scheme reflects the method used to identify them, and also our confidence in being able to know that they're a GDE. So whether they've got a high, medium or low potential to be a GDE. So that's the aquatic ones. And I'll quickly show you the terrestrial one, so that's the vegetation. And again, it's got a similar colour scheme showing you information about the method and about the potential to be a GDE. So I won't show you too much more about the GDE Atlas here today, but what I will mention is that we've got an excellent video on the GDE Atlas. It's available from our groundwater information page and also from the Bureau YouTube page. It's shot on site at the Werribee Gorge, which is a beautiful GDE near Melbourne, and it features one of the hydrogeologists from the Bureau. So please take a look.
And we might put that URL into the presentation when we...
Don't tell me.
We will give you the direct URL guide, so no need to worry about taking down any, URLs or anything of the like. We'll send all that to you. So poll time again, because we love a bit of trivia. So our friend Mike will launch that poll, and once again you'll see that on your screens in a separate pop-up box. So that's been launched now, but I will read that out quickly. So stretching from the Gulf of Carpentaria through to Queensland, New South Wales, the Northern Territory and South Australia, what is Australia's largest source of groundwater? We have A, the Murray-Darling Basin, B, Papua Underground River Delta, C, the Great Artesian Basin, or perhaps D, the High Plains Aquifer. Caroline, any thoughts?
Oh, I don't know. I have a thought, but I think it's because I saw the slide.
Sorry. No, I didn't spoil it.
But while we're waiting, I might just ask a quick question that came in while you were talking, Eloise, which is, does the BOM have aquifer property data for key aquifer systems?
We don't at the moment. What's available through the Insight? John, is there anything?
Unfortunately, nothing on, I'm going to presume they're talking about conductivities and porosity and things like that.
Yeah.
We don't really have that kind of data set available.
Although I think through their GeoFabric product, didn't they have some aquifer property information?
There might be a little bit in there. I'm not sure off the top of my head what that coverage is. But we certainly haven't exposed that yet through the Insight.
Yeah. Maybe that's something we can look into and get back to. Yeah.
Good, but well, after we've answered that, let's see how knowledgeable our audience is.
Well, our audience is very knowledgeable. 81% of people have gone with C, which is the Grand Teton Basin, and that is the correct answer. And we'll just show you here a little map of the basin. So it's very large, covers the 20% of Australia's land surface, and I've been instructed that I have to tell you it contains 130,000 times enough water to fill Sydney Harbour. 130,000 Sydney Harbours.
Wow.
I don't know how many Olympic swimming pools it is.
If anyone wants to do that equation for us quickly, feel free to send it through in the chat.
And as I mentioned before, we will have one of those 3D hydrostratigraphic PDFs for the Great Artesian Basin. And that's, something we've been doing with Geoscience Australia, the collaboration.
Great, thanks always.
All right, John.
So just getting now to the last product in the Groundwater Information Suite.
Last but not least.
Last but not least, that's right, the Australian Groundwater Insight. And I'm going to tempt fate again by doing another live demo.
People think you're very brave. We've had some mentions in the chat.
So I'll just quickly click back to the, so here we are at bom.gov.au/water/groundwater. This is the Groundwater Information
See how easy
Suite.
it is.
And I'm just going to click up here in the top left-hand side to launch the Australian Groundwater Insight. Now, in the Insight, information is grouped on the menu bar on the left-hand side here. So you can see the high-level groups of information we've got. There are two types of data here. You'll either have a text page, like the summary here, where we've got text information, or we'll have a map with one of the natural data sets presented here in a map. All of these maps have, zooms and tools you'd expect to see on a Canvas interface, and down here on the left-hand side, we've got contextual information as well. Now, I'm not really going to have time to go through all the features here, unfortunately, but what were the results for our first poll there at the top of the talk? Who was our number one user today?
Government. Who's our number one user today?
So let's pretend that we are a government agency, a government employee. Let's pretend. And we've been tasked with finding out a little bit about groundwater for the Northern Australia project, which is happening at the moment. So I'm just going to zoom in this map on the top end. And the first thing I might want to look at is aquifer boundary. So I'm going to go over here to the aquifer boundary menu on the left-hand side and click that. And you can see here that we've got aquifer boundaries grouped as upper, middle, and lower for across Australia. Just being a little bit slow today, the live demo doing what it does best. So if you are looking at these menu items, just a little hint here is the I button on the left-hand side. If we click there, this will give us some information about the layer that you're looking at. And importantly in here, there's information about finding out more detailed reports and explanation of what you can see here. So we've got the upper, a little bit of technical issue here.
Oh no, have we frozen?
We might have frozen it, I'm not sure.
We've broke it.
We've broken it.
That's all right. If need be, we do have some screenshots that we...
Oh, here we go.
No,
we'll
here we
start
go.
with them.
Excellent.
So we'll skip the aquifer boundary now. We're looking at principal hydrogeology. I'll just zoom out to the whole of Australia by clicking on the Australia button at the top here. And we can see this information across all of Australia. So this is a data set produced by Geoscience Australia, and it gives us a national look at the principal aquifers across the country. So we can see here the Great Artesian Basin, we just looked at in blue, and then the greens and blues representing productive aquifers, and the browns representing low productivity areas. So straight away we can get an indication of where groundwater is important across the country. So I'll just zoom back in at the top there. So once we've got an indication of sort of where groundwater exists, so where are these productive aquifers, we might also want to have a look at where is groundwater used. So just to orientate us, I'm going to put on the place names, and I'm going to click down here onto the groundwater entitlements. So this map here is showing us the location and relative size of where people hold a license to extract groundwater. And we can see there's a bit of a clump out here to the east of Darwin, and quite a large group here around Katherine. So I'm just going to zoom in there. We can see quite a spread to the east, to the east and west across Katherine there. And just by way of orientation again, I'm going to turn on the rivers there so I can just have a look at where we've got water features. And I'll see if those aquifer boundaries want to work now. Ah, there we go. So here I've just turned on the lower aquifer boundary for this area, so we can see that a lot of those, I'll turn the middle one too, and the upper there. We can see how those licenses interact with the aquifer boundaries in the region. Now I'll just click back to that hydrogeology one again. Seems to be working now. We've got these upper, middle and lower aquifers. And one feature about all these maps is if you click on them somewhere, it will give you a little pop-up with information about the location you've clicked on. And these are linked to the higher level menu item over on the left-hand side. So I've got hydrogeology selected, so now when I scroll down, I get information about the hydrogeology here. And there was a question before, I think, about aquifer names across the country. So I'll just point out here that the aquifer names here, we've done our best to use local names. So we've got the Ulla Dolostone, Jindakin, and Tinder Limestone. And the reason for this is that when people have read a report or maybe a management plan in their area, they'll understand what aquifers are being talked about. So now we understand that's the where groundwater is. We can go back and look at the where is it being used. This is an indicative map showing us sort of the location where groundwater is extracted. And we can also have some information around where stock and domestic use occurs. So this map is just showing you the density of bores that have been drilled for the purpose of stock and domestic. It's not exactly a volumetric extraction, but it just gives you an idea. We can see around Darwin and also quite a lot around Katherine, quite a lot of stock and domestic there. So now I understand where groundwater is and a little bit about how it's being used. I might be interested in then turning on the management layer to see a bit about how groundwater is being managed in the area. I'll just turn off some of these contextual layers so we can see what's going on. And once again, I can click on this map here, and it will give me a pop-up showing me what management areas exist in this location. So in that location where I've clicked, there are two. There's the Daly Roper Water Control District and the Tyndall Katherine Water Allocation Plan. And for each of these, we've got some high-level summary information about the current level of entitlement, the entitlement limit, if there is one, the current level of entitlement, and then down here at the bottom, where available, we've got plots of recent groundwater use, so annual use for that management area. This is excellent information because it shows not just where groundwater is, where it is, but also where it's being used, and giving you some indication about how much is being extracted from these areas. There's a lot more to go through here, but I think in the interest of time, I'm getting the wrap up.
No, we've just got a few questions coming through, so
sure.
I might pass them on, and then as more questions come in, you can keep talking. But we've had a couple. One, how are groundwater level trends determined? And is groundwater salinity trend data available? So maybe the first one.
Thanks, Jane. So it's eagle eyes here. Is noticed on the left-hand side.
Talk about something else, John.
We've got a groundwater level trend. So I'll just click this one on for the. I'll select the lower aquifer 2012-2017, the most recent 5-year trend here. And I'll click that lower aquifer on again. Sorry. And here we can see that there's sort of a range of different trends. So we've got some declining bores with a declining level, and then some with stable and rising as well. So if you want to find out how this is calculated, how it's determined, the best thing is to go across here to the I button, and then on the metadata page, that'll give you a detailed summary about how those things are selected. The short answer is we look for bores that have got a good spread of data, so they're not just clustered or they're just only a few readings, good spread of data across that 5-year period. We then do some sort of data cleaning to aggregate things to a monthly reading, and then it's essentially a linear least squares regression line fitted through that data. And if that is falling by more than 10 centimetres a year or rising by more than 10 centimetres a year, we find this to be a rising or declining trend.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you for that question, Jane. Yeah, and the follow-up question from Jane is groundwater salinity trend data available?
Right, okay.
Is it available from the inside, or is it?
Not specifically a trend.
Okay.
We don't have the same trend data available. Part of that is because they're all flat, as I said before. They don't really change very much. But we do have something down here that we've called salinity change. And this is really looking at where we've got, sorry, I'll just zoom us out to the national view here so that we can see things across the country. And I might just turn off place names as well. So this is looking at are salinity values in the recent years very much higher than the long-term average. And you can see straight away that if you look at the country as a whole, most of those are little grey dots indicating there's no real change. In some areas, I'll zoom in a bit, you do find that there is a bit of a mixture. So sometimes you've got things slightly higher, sometimes you've got things slightly lower. But certainly nationally, it's no change is the story.
Great. So we've got a couple more minutes if anyone wants to send in some more questions. There was one a bit further back I'll just jump back to, which was apart from, I think it was for a previous presentation, but apart from salinity, is other groundwater chemistry data available? And I think that's...
Yes. Yeah, that's a question for me. That's related to the Explorer. So I think that was from Jane as well.
Very active question.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jane.
So he's right that we do have salinity data available for the whole country, and that comes under the water regulations. We've actually been collaborating with Geoscience Australia, and they send their groundwater chemistry data to us. They collect chemistry data on a project basis, so where they do projects, they have that data available. So there's quite a bit of data for the GAB and for some paleo channels. And I believe at the moment they're doing a lot of work in Northern Australia. So hopefully in the future we'll be getting a lot of new data for there. And so that's available through the Explorer. And then the third thing to note is that the Bureau is currently doing a scoping study on water chemistry data more generally. So it's recently gone out to potential users and asked, you know, what they're interested in terms of chemistry data. So hopefully we'll hear more about that project in the next 6 months or so.
So I'll just do one more question, then we might wrap up. But as I said earlier, we can stay on the line for a bit longer and answer some questions.
Yeah, we can do that for a minute or two. Maybe if we'll just finish up with the formalities for today.
We'll do the formalities for today. All right. So I think, Eloise, do you want to just give us a quick summary?
So
before we wrap up?
Just to summarise and keep going through, John. So first of all, I'd like to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. I know John and I have really enjoyed telling you about our groundwater products. So just to summarise, we spoke about the importance of groundwater in Australia, the Bureau's role in groundwater, and then we took you through the products in the groundwater information suite. If you want more information about our groundwater products, please do take a look at the groundwater information suite webpage, and the URL is there on the screen. We also have a newsletter, and you can subscribe by clicking the link that's on the screen there as well, or send us an email to groundwater@bom.gov.au. And the last thing is that we do have 2 really good videos that are available from the Groundwater Information Suite webpage, one on the GDE Atlas and one on the Groundwater Information Suite more generally. So I would encourage you to have a look at those videos.
Eloise. So that brings us to the end of our webinar today. Thank you, John and Eloise, for joining us in the studio. We're grateful you could share your knowledge with us. To our audience, thank you again for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed the session and we do hope you'll join us again next time. If you're enjoying the BOM webinars, don't forget to subscribe to receive information on upcoming webinars, watch webinars on demand via the Bureau YouTube channel and engage with us on social media using #BOMWebinars. Finally, but most importantly, we want your feedback. It is our aim to bring you the highest possible quality webinars, but we can't do that unless you share your experiences with us. Once we close this webinar, a short survey will pop up on your screen and we'd be very grateful if you could complete it for us. Once again, thank you for your time and we look forward to seeing you again. Goodbye to those who are leaving, and we will run through just a couple more questions for a few minutes if you want to stay on the line, but otherwise, hopefully, groundwater@bom.gov.au, you can have all your questions answered.
Most definitely, and to those of you asking, yes, we're recording today's session, so if you need to run off now that it's 3 o'clock on the dot, please feel free to review the recording and you can catch up on those Q&As that you missed out on that way also. Question from someone who calls himself Superman. We love a good sense of humour. If I want to make a new groundwater model, can I download the aquifer stratigraphy layer elevation data for a custom region in a format I can import to modelling software?
Great question.
Great question. I could barely read it, Eloise.
So it's not really for a custom region, but if you send an email to groundwater@bom.gov.au, you can receive the national NGIS database, and it has each of the model layers we have available in there. The format is, it's an Esri format, so I mean, most people who use GIS have access to that software, but we could potentially look at exporting it to something that's more, that doesn't use proprietary software.
Awesome. Another question from Mark.
Mark, in New South Wales, the DPI is starting to do soil moisture monitoring. Will this info get added to the BOM models?
I think Mark should have been at your last webinar.
Yeah,
talking here.
I think it's added. It is in some of our BOM products, but it's not. Is it going to be added to the groundwater anytime soon? No.
The soil moisture stuff will definitely fall into the Aura model, which we had here last week. So I can't answer that off the top of my head, but we can certainly get in touch with the modelling guys and ask them.
Yeah, definitely. And feel free to review that last webinar recording as well. You might find that to be quite helpful. Sunil? Is asking.
Yeah, do you have benchmark salinity data for a certain groundwater system in a region, and do you compare rising or falling trend compared to the benchmark data?
Yeah, thanks, Sunil. I'll just flick back to the inside again. So when I was talking about the change, this is the change we were looking at before, that's compared against this other one we've got here called average salinity. So what we're looking at here is our recent levels significantly different from the long-term average. So the long-term average might be fairly salty in this area. So the orange dots there, this is looking at the upper aquifer, the orange and red dots are quite saline. So if you've got a change from quite saline to a bit more saline, you probably don't care that much. It's where you go fresh to salty that's a bit of an issue. So yeah, this map we looked at before is actually benchmarked against the average salinity information that's presented here.
Great question from Sunil. And we might just take one last question to finish up today's webinar, and that's come through from Zhang again. Are national waterable maps available?
So I guess national water table maps, I guess there's two things. There's the data that's available through the GeoFabric. It's not national, but it does cover some parts of Australia. So that's available from the Bureau website under the GeoFabric. And the other thing is we're working on some projects with Tim Peterson from Melbourne University. I don't know what's the timeline.
I think they're still a little way off. I know they've produced depth to water table maps for Victoria, but certainly a national map would be a bit further off because we're a bit data scarce in a lot of spots around the nation.
Great, wonderful questions, and we might leave it at that. So thank you everyone for being involved, and we hope to see you again at a future BOM webinar. Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.